Gopichana Vallabha Girivarodari. Jai Gopichana Vallabha Girivarodari. Yashodanandana Vajajana Ranjana. Yashodanandana Vajajana Ranjana. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Gopichana Vallabha Girivarodari. Jaya Gopichana Vallabha Girivarodari. Yashodanandana Vrajajana Ranjana. Yashodanandana Vrajajana Ranjana. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram Ram Hare Hare. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram Ram Hare Hare. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram Ram Hare Hare. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram Ram Hare Hare. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Srila Prabhupada. Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Srila Prabhupada. Jai Vishnupada Paramahamsa Paramayaksha Stokta Sada Srimad Sri Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada की जय. ISKCON संस्थापक Srila Prabhupada की जय. Jai Vishnupada Paramahamsa Paramayaksha Stokta Sada Srimad Bhaktivedanta Swami Gosvāmī Maharaj Prabhupada की जय. Jai Vishnupada Guru Kishodas Maharaj की जय. Jai Vishnupada Sachidananda Sri Bhaktivinoda Thakur की जय. Jai Vishnupada Vaishnava Sarma Sri Jagannath Das Babu Maharaj की जय. जय श्री रूप सनातन भट्ट रघुनाथ श्री जी प्रभुपाद भट्टदास रघुनाथ गोस्वामी प्रभु की जय. नमाचार्य श्रीदास ठाकुर की जय. प्रेम से श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्तवृंद की जय. Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopina Sham Kund Radha Kunda Giri Govardhan ki jai. Shri Shri Gaurangi Bangalore Ishwar Bhagwan ki jai. Shri Shri Jagannath Baldev Subhadra Sudarshan Bhagwan ki jai. Shri Mayapur Dham ki jai. Shri Vrindavan Dham ki jai. Ganga Mai ki jai. Yamuna Mai ki jai. Bhakti Devi ki jai. Tulasi Devi ki jai. Ananta Kori Vaishnava ki jai. Shri Harnam Sankirtan ki jai. Granthraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. ISKCON Vartmana Guruvanda ki jai. Samavita Bhaktivinoda ki jai. Gaurav Parimanande. Hari Hari Bol. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Shri Guru and Shri Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Om Jnanati Mirandasya Ananjana Shalakaya Chakshar Naritam Mena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manopishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupapadamahyam Tadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Dapadakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sakarjatam Sakana Raghunathanvidam Tam Jivam Sadvaitam Savdutam Parijan Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sakanayata Shiv Shakanvitam Shya He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namastude Bhaktakanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanuste Devi Pranamami Haripriye Vanchakalpatarubhyasya Kvasnarupe Vachapatitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaura Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Moham Karuti Vachana Pangam Nati Dikirmek Badama Mandeshi Granthana Paramanama Shri Chaitanya Mishra. Hare Krishna. I'd like to welcome you all to this Saturday morning Srimad Bhagavatam class. We are discussing today from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 19, entitled The Appearance of Śukadeva Gosvāmī. So as we see here in the previous chapter, just to go through the summary, Parikshit Maharaj went out the forest and he was feeling thirsty. He went into a hutman where Shamika Muni was in a deep meditation on trance. And at that time, Parikshit Maharaj requested, and he felt that having come as a king of the ruler of the kingdom, he was not given even a seat. He saw he was a little bit upset with the king, and in that mood of anger, he saw a dead snake and he put it on the neck of Shamika Muni. And this, his son Shringi, he realized that how his father has been insulted. Both father and son have been great Brahmanas, devotees of the Lord. But son, out of his immaturity, he cursed Parikshit Maharaj that he would die in 7 days due to a snake bite. So Parikshit Maharaj is on his way back. And at that time, actually we start from here, which is chapter 19. What happens is that Parikshit Maharaj feels repentant for the action that he did of putting a dead snake on a devotee Brahmana who was actually meditating on the personality of Godhead. So generally, a devotee is faultless. He does not even intentionally or unintentionally commit any offense, particularly to not only for to a Brahmana, but also the devotees of the Lord. He doesn't try and commit offenses. So he was repenting that such a great king who was promoting protection of cow, Kshatriyas. Actually, the Kshatriya ruler is supposed to protect the Brahmanas and protect everybody. Kshat means to protect. So here we see that one who was protecting the Brahmanas, the cows and everybody, how come he did a very uncivilized act? He was thinking that it's a very uncivilized act which he did. So he was feeling repentant. Now this is very, very natural for a devotee to always feel repentant. A normally materialistic person today, even if he has committed the most abominable act, whatever it may be, he may not feel repentant. But a devotee is such, he's got so many good qualities that he feels immediately repentant for having done an activity like that. And here Parikshit Maharaj was feeling that this act which he did was both heinous and very uncivilized. And accordingly, he was feeling a bit distressed. Oh, how come I have done an activity like this? So repentance is very natural for a pure devotee, and Parikshit Maharaj was no exemption for that. Now, a devotee generally is always faultless. He does not commit any sins or offenses to anybody. What to talk about a Brahmana? Because an offense against a Brahmana or a devotee is very, very offensive, because even the Lord does not like that, because a devotee is very, very dear to the Lord. So they are always in the mood of serving the Lord. So an offense committed at the lotus feet of a Vaishnava or a devotee, the Lord does not like it. The Lord may even accept an offense committed against himself, but he does not accept an offense committed on a devotee of the Lord. So here, Parikshit Maharaj was feeling very, very repentant because he was sinless, but still he was forced into a circumstance to commit this act, which is explained in the later parts of this chapter. And the Lord also, not only that, the Lord also forgives an act like this, because he knows that a devotee does not do these acts, does not perform such acts purposely. So the Lord understands the mood of repentance. The point is that we may commit sometimes certain activities which may be offensive, may be sinful, but if it is unintentional, the Lord is seated in the heart as the Paramatma. The Lord knows and he also forgives. But if it is intentional, then the Lord also understands, and then accordingly the one who performs such acts also has to pay for a price for that. He has to suffer for that. So this is how the chapter begins. So Parikshit Maharaj was thinking that he has neglected the injunctions of the Lord, and therefore for having committed this activity, he must face some consequences, because being a devotee, he also knows that the laws of karma act on everybody. It's a very important aspect which is generally people tend to ignore these days. Law of karma is very, very powerful, whether he's a king or whether it is a citizen or anybody. Laws of karma act on everyone. In fact, the very fact that we are here in this material world is due to the reason that we perform actions, and every action has got its equal and opposite reaction, whether it is good or whether it is bad. Pious activities, good actions result in good karma. So one reaps good results, whereas impious activities, bad actions, they all result in impious karma, which gives resultant reactions which are also impious. So a ruler of the kingdom used to be very well aware of these facts, because they were also ruling based on the advice of the Brahmanas, or the so-called saintly persons. So they were aware of this, and so Parikshit Maharaj was certainly thinking that some great calamity is going to come in his life, because as a ruler, because the higher you go, the higher the sensitivity is. For example, a common citizen may perform some impious act, but if he also has to suffer for that. But when a person holding a very responsible position as a leader, for example, here like a king, if he performs an impious act, he sets a wrong example to the whole society, and the Lord also does not accept that. So he has to suffer more than a normal citizen. That is why when one holds a position of responsibility, it is very, very important. So that's why it is said in the Shastra that one should not become a father, a mother, a head of a family, or a ruler, a king, a teacher, a spiritual master. One should not take up responsibility unless and until one can deliver the dependents from the cycle of birth and death. That means one has to be very, very mature, responsible, and sensitive in handling situations. So Parikshit Maharaj was a very great devotee of the Lord. He set a perfect example, being coming from the dynasty of the Pandavas, of giving protection to all. So he was feeling repentant, and he realized that there must be something that he has to come across as a result of this particular action. So he thought, now it is better that that calamity come now, so that I may be free, I may become free from this sinful reaction and not commit this offense again. So this is a attitude of a perfect devotee, because once he has committed, he's feeling that repentance, oh, what have I done wrong? And second thing is that he always thinks that, yes, I must face some consequences for this, because I committed this act. And if he has to face it, he takes it in the right spirit. And also, he becomes very, very cautious in his approach to handling such situations, so that he does not commit the same activity again. So this is the perfect activity attitude of a devotee of the Lord. Now, it is also said in Chaitanya Charitamrita, it's a very popular quote from Vishnu Purana, Namo Brahmane Devaya Go, Brahmane Itaicha, Jagatitaya, Krishnaya Govindaya, Namo Namaha. Translation is, it says, let me offer my respectful obeisances unto Lord Krishna, who is the worshipable deity for all Brahminical men, who is well-wisher of cows and brahmanas, and who is always benefiting the whole world. So that means the Lord actually is very much favorable to the brahmanas. Brahmanas means not the so-called brahmanas whom we see today, but brahmanas who are real devotees of the Lord, and also cows, because the Lord gives personally protection to the devotees of the Lord and the cows also. So when such a thing happens, Parikshit Maharaj felt that it was an offense committed, and the Lord himself will not be very happy about it. And he felt that, yes, two things are very important in this verse. One is that he felt that his family members should not suffer for his actions. And the second thing is that he should not repeat this act again. Now, as a head of the family, he is responsible for the whole members of the family. For example, if he performs some devotional service, his family members also get the benefit of it. That means they are also getting the effect of the devotional service performed by the head of the family, that is the husband. Similarly, if there is an impious act that is performed by a head, it also affects the other members of the family. So Parikshit Maharaj was feeling repentant that it should not, this act of his should be paid for by him in terms of the reaction, but it should not affect his family members. He was so repentant, and that he should also not commit that activity again. Now, the example is given then in the 7th canto as to how Prahlad Maharaj, his father tortured him so much in every possible way. But Prahlad Maharaj was very much fixed in the devotional service to Lord Narasimhadev. So, by Prahlad Maharaj, this thing, after Hiranyakashipu was killed, the Lord asked Prahlad Maharaj to take a boon, and he said that let my father, whatever activities he has done of torturing me, let him not pay a price for it. He would like this thing to be pardoned. But Narasimhadev said that even that because of the devotional service of Prahlad Maharaj, his father will be excused from all the sinful activities, the offense that he has committed to this Vaishnava son. So that means there is an effect for both devotional service, also the effect of impious activities that are committed by a head of a family or head of any society. So Parikshit Maharaj was feeling that his family members should not have an effect due to his activity. So that is why the example is given that even Bali Maharaj, he was a great grandson of Prahlad Maharaj. So one devotee in a family is sufficient enough to protect the entire family. So Bali Maharaj was a grandson of Prahlad Maharaj. So Prahlad Maharaj's devotional service also helped to and gave an opportunity for a devotee to take part in the family. Similarly, what happens is, even in our lives, if one member takes up to the path of devotional service, the entire family get the opportunity of performing devotional service. Performing devotional service means it is an eternal activity. Even a small act that is performed in devotional service to the Supreme Lord is carried forever into that account of the devotee. And not only the devotee, even the devotees members also get the benefit. So it is an eternal act, not a temporary act like any other material activity. So that is why it is very much important that at least someone takes some devotional service within the family. So in the following sloka, it is said how Parikshit Maharaj was thinking, what he was contemplating in his mind. Now he was thinking, I'm a very uncivilized, I'm a sinful person, and due to my neglect of Brahminical culture, God consciousness, and cow protection, and therefore I wish that my kingdom, my strength, my riches, they all burn off immediately by the fire of Brahmana's wrath, so that in the future I may not be guided by such inauspicious attitudes. Here, so there were a lot of important points in this third sloka. First and the foremost, Parikshit Maharaj was a great devotee of the Lord, but he was feeling that he was uncivilized, and as also he was very, very sinful. And what is the reason he was feeling that this activity of his, which he has performed, is due to neglect of three very important aspects for the development of the society or peace and prosperity in the society. One is Brahminical culture. Brahminical culture is protection of the Brahmanas and other things. Second is God consciousness. And the third is cow protection. These are three very, very vital aspects in the ruling of a kingdom, because cow protection, protection of cows and Brahmanas are very, very dear to the Lord. And God consciousness is a responsibility of each and every head in whether it is a family or like I mentioned, that one should not become a father or mother or a head unless until he can deliver his dependents from the cycle of birth and death. That means that can happen only if one inculcates the culture of God consciousness to his dependents. So if these three vital aspects, that is Brahminical culture, God consciousness, and protection of cows are not taken care of, then that means what happens is that that kingdom or whatever one is heading, it gets doomed. So that is why Parikshit Maharaj was repentant that he has committed a very uncivilized act due to neglect of these three aspects. And therefore he prays that his kingdom or his strength or the strength and the riches may immediately be burnt by the fire of Brahmana's wrath. Now, in this respect, it is not that he is not praying that the whole kingdom should be vanished. No, but rather he becomes detached from this attachment to the kingdom by the fire of Brahmana's wrath. So during those years, whenever a Brahmana used to get angry, it was very, very powerful. Such curses used to always have an effect, and it was not possible to take back the curse. So Parikshit Maharaj was thinking that it is better that the Brahmana's curse on him of dying in 7 days takes place with immediate, so that in future he may not be guided by these inauspicious activities. So this is a very important activity or thought process in the mind of Parikshit Maharaj. Now, same Parikshit Maharaj, we saw in the previous chapter how he saw the personality of Kali in the form of a Shudra. The Shudra was trying to chastise the cow and the bull, but Parikshit Maharaj, he immediately wanted to give punishment to that Shudra and kill him. So Parikshit Maharaj was such a powerful person who was chastising anyone who was bringing harm to a cow and a bull. But here he felt that he had neglected those principles. So he was feeling that it is better that he loses his wealth, not the kingdom's wealth, but he loses his wealth, his strength, and his riches by the Brahmana's wrath, so that he may not repeat the same again. And the purport, Srila Prabhupada mentions that three vital aspects which I mentioned are very, very important for peace and prosperity to prevail in the society. So today, if we see, we find that there is no peace and there is no prosperity. People might talk of economic development, this, that, and all, so many things. But actually, the whole world is suffering due to lack of these three things. That is protection of brahmanas, because devotees don't have any protection throughout the world. Cows are not protected and they are sent to the slaughterhouses, which is a very, very abominable offense. And the third thing is God consciousness is lacking as a whole. So because of these three things, economic development does not take place. Somewhere something may be taking place, but in general, as we also see, the whole world is entering into a very poor state of affairs, and as the future we see. And because of lack of proper development of these three, there is no peace and prosperity in the society. And that is why we see that everyone is disturbed, whether a common man or a head of a state or a head of a society, everyone is mentally, physically disturbed in every possible way. So Parikshit Maharaj was induced to think like this, that a small provocation due to his hunger and thirst, how come he neglected this Brahminical culture? A personality who is supposed to be very, very highly regarded, who gave protection, how come just because of a small incident by which made him thirsty, forced him to commit a very abominable act? So this way, when he was just thinking, he got the news that he was already cursed. Actually, he was there in the forest and he was coming back home. He was thinking that I should pay a price for this act which I committed. But as he was coming back, he realized that he has already been cursed to death by a snake bite because of the activity that he has performed. So the king took this as a good news, for it would become, he would become indifferent to all the worldly affairs. Now a king is one who is supposed to be involved at the micro level of his management of the worldly affairs. So Parikshit Maharaj thought that whatever has happened, it's a good news for him, and it would bring detachment to him from all the worldly affairs. So, which means that he has to detach himself from all the material opulence. Now, if we see ourselves in a situation like this, we might think, oh, how come that person has cursed me to death? Now I must see how I can take revenge on a person like him. But Parikshit Maharaj actually thought that it was a good news for him, that because whatever has happened, it has happened by the will of the Lord. So this is how a devotee always thinks, because a devotee knows that he has to go back to Godhead. And here, for that, material opulence is a big impediment, which is true, because uh, if somebody has a material opulence, even today we see that they don't take the path to spiritual life very easily. They're very reluctant. If you go and talk to a very rich man today, that we are coming from the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, please do chanting, please read Bhagavad Gita, hear Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam. They will say, why should I do that? I'm already happy. So that means that material opulence is a big impediment on the path of spiritual life. And purpose of our taking birth in this material world, particularly in the human form of life, is to realize that we have to go back to Godhead and not continue in the cycle of birth and death. So Parikshit Maharaj realized that. So he thought, yes, now what has happened is very good for me. It's a good news for me, because that has cleared the path for me to detach myself. Now, if we see, the Pandavas were great devotees of the Lord, and Parikshit Maharaj was born in that family. Now, Parikshit Maharaj was not one who was attached to the kingdom, but he is setting an example by this, saying that irrespective of whatever one's position is, one should not be attached to material opulence. Now, he thought that this incident that has happened will bring detachment in me, by which I can easily go back to Godhead. So this is a very important point. Another important point that is mentioned in this verse is that Parikshit Maharaj actually could have gone to Shamika Muni and begged pardon. that, okay, because he was also repentant and he wanted to, he could have gone to the Muni and asked forgiveness for that activity he did. But nothing, what is mentioned here is that both Parikshit Maharaj as well as Shamika Muni, they were all highly self-realized souls. So he thought that, okay, one thing is, I don't want to bring that Muni, because the Muni was also a great personality, was a great devotee of the Lord. He thought that if he goes and begs forgiveness, the Muni might also uh, feel shame on it, and he might feel, oh, why such a person like a king has come and asked for forgiveness. So he thought he could have gone and asked for forgiveness, but he thought that he did the right thing of not going there and asking. Rather, he thought that it is better I take the resultant action for this karma and pay the price for it, and my activity becomes nullified. This is the attitude of a perfect personality like Parishit Maharaj. Srila Prabhupada mentions how this Varnashrama system or the Sanatan Dharma, which is called, it is an eternal occupation of training the citizens to go back to Godhead. So this Varnashrama system has been established by the Lord himself, which he declares in Bhagavad Gita. And particularly all these ashramas like Brahmachari, Grihastha, Vanaprastha, Sannyasi, all these ashramas were meant for those placed in these ashrams to go back to Godhead. And that can happen only in the human form of life. But foolish people, they don't realize that this material thing world is meant for going back, but they think that it's a place for enjoyment. So they think, what is the point of taking care of these three important points which I mentioned? So Parikshit Maharaj thought that he has got a 7-day notice, which not everybody will get, because nobody knows what time death comes, how it will come. Sometimes it may be accident, and as the Lord himself says in Bhagavad Gita, whatever one thinks at the time of leaving his body, that is will be his next body. He says in Bhagavad Gita, Manmana Bhavat Matpatto Madhyadimam Namaskuru. So if you think of me, you come back to Godhead. You come back to my world. But if you think of something else, you take the body like that in this material world. So we are all in this cycle. So another important point that is mentioned here in that purport is that deterioration of the ideals of the Indian civilization has brought about the deterioration of civic life, not only in India, but also abroad, because India is actually the origin of spiritual life and rich in its culture, which we all fail to understand. So when things started to deteriorate gradually, and when Kali Yuga started, conditions of life started deteriorating, and as a result it has spread throughout the world, because we are supposed to set an example to the whole world by our rich spiritual culture. Then the following sloka is explained how when Parikshit Maharaj realized this, he thought that he would now prepare himself for going back to Godhead. How he prepared? He sat down on the bank of Ganges to focus on Krishna consciousness, rejecting all other practice of self-realization. Now, there are so many processes that are there, but he took up the best process, that is devotional service. This other process may be like Karma Yoga, Jnana Yoga, Dhyana Yoga, which are explained in Bhagavad Gita. But ultimately, the Lord also says that Bhakti Yoga is the best. The best yogi is one who always thinks of me in devotional service. So Parikshit Maharaj took up this process of Krishna consciousness to focus on the loving service to the Lord, for which he sat on the bank of Ganges. So the point is that there's so many planets, spiritual planets. Now here we may see this earth, but there's so many planets in the material as well as the spiritual worlds. And spiritual Parishit Maharava was one who was qualified enough to go back to Golak Vrindavan, which is the topmost of the spiritual planet. So he went to the bank of Ganges and he started meditating on this, going back. So it is mentioned that there are two fact points. One is there's mention of Ganga, also there's a mention of Yamuna. So by historical facts, it is said that he might have performed this thing on the bank of Yamuna, but nevertheless, Srila Prabhupada mentions that Both Ganga as well as Yamuna are very, very auspicious rivers. Why? Because they carry the dust of the lotus feet of the Lord, anointed with tulsi leaves. So tulsi leaves are always offered to the Lord, and both Ganges and Yamuna are auspicious for that. So anyone who takes shelter of these rivers get the benefit of taking uh, bath. If they go and take bath, also it has a lot of impetus in their spiritual life. So Srila Prabhupada quotes that both are equally important from the spiritual perspective. But as far as sanctity is concerned, Srila Prabhupada mentioned that the river Yamuna is more directly connected with Lord Krishna than the Ganges. So that means Yamuna is more connected with Ganges, so it has got more potency. The reason is given, the Lord sanctified the river Yamuna from the beginning of his transcendental pastimes in the world. So while his father Vasudeva was crossing the Yamuna with the baby Lord Krishna for a safer place at Gokula, on the other bank of the river from Mathura, the Lord fell down in the river, and by the dust of his lotus feet, the river at once became sanctified. So this is a childhood pastime. When the Lord, his father Vasudeva was carrying Lord in a basket, the Lord fell down, and then the Lord sanctified the river. So it is mentioned that Parikshit Maharaj took shelter of this particular river, which is really flowing and carrying the dust of the Lord's Lord's lotus feet. And as soon as one becomes connected to the water of Ganga or Yamuna, one becomes purified. So the Lord performed more pastimes in Yamuna than in the Ganges. So based on that, there is a quote in the Varaha Purana, which Jiva Gosvāmī quotes, stating that there is no difference between the water of Ganges and Yamuna, but when the water of Ganges is sanctified 100 times, it is called Yamuna. So this is a very perfect example of how powerful is the Yamuna water. Similarly, it is mentioned in the scriptures that 1,000 names of Vishnu are equal to one name of Rama, and 3 names of Lord Rama are equal to one name of Krishna. As we proceed further, then the king decided to sit on the bank to fast unto death and give himself unto the lotus feet of Krishna, who alone can give liberation. So freeing himself, he accepted the vow of a sage. Now, the reason he felt was that to become detached, one has to free himself from even the pangs of hunger and thirst. So he thought that he will fast unto death. So Parikshit Maharaj decided to meditate on the lotus feet of Lord Krishna, who is the one who can give liberation. Now, the banks of Ganges or Yamuna give one a chance to remember the Lord continuously. So Parikshit Maharaj freed himself from all the material association and meditated on the lotus feet of Lord Krishna, and that is the way of liberation. So this is a perfect way to focus or meditate on the Lord at the point of our leaving the body. But Parikshit Maharaj was fortunate to get a 7-day notice, which we may not get. Now, the conditions of the material world are so organized that one commits sins willingly or unwillingly. And Parikshit Maharaj is a perfect example how he was such a sinless and a pious king, but he became a victim of an offense, even though he was unwilling to commit such a mistake. So many times we might not want to commit an offense or a sin, but we may be forced to do by circumstances. The reason for which we realize will be that it's also a blessing of the Lord, as Parikshit Maharaj realized, because if he would have stayed, he would have become attached to the kingdom, but he thought it was time for him to go back to Godhead. And he also thought that this curse has become a great boon because such reverses of life, he took it, are favorable in life. The principle is that one should not willingly commit, but should always try to remember the Lord, always without deviation. So when one does this, then even if something happens by accident, the Lord understands and the Lord can forgive also. So when Parikshit Maharaj was sitting on the bank of the Ganges like this, all great souls accompanied by great disciples and sages who actually are considered as holy places of pilgrimage. They all arrived at that particular point where Parikshit Maharaj was meditating. So when he was sitting, the news spread. Those days there was no mobile phone, nothing. But as soon as everyone realized, even up to the heavenly planets, that there is a great devotee of the Lord who is leaving the body, many great sages, demigods, they all came to that point to witness the incident. They all came on the pleas of pilgrimage. See, we all take yatras, tirtha yatras. So they, under that protection of taking a pilgrimage, they all came to the place where Parikshit Maharaj was fasting. And actually, it is said that they came to meet Parikshit Maharaj, and not for pilgrimage, because Parikshit Maharaj was a great devotee. See, normally, if somebody is sick and we feel, oh, he's going to die, we all go and try to see that person. So, and here Parikshit Maharaj was a great king, the emperor of the whole world. So they all came to see him, so that it was a great respect for him. And they could foresee also that this is going to be an occasion where Srimad Bhagavatam is going to be spoken by a great personality. So they all wanted to take advantage of this great occasion. And then in the following slokas, it is mentioned as to how there were great sages like Atri, Bhrigumuni, Vashishta, Vishwamitra, all these great personalities, Bharadwaja Rishi, Gautam Rishi, they were all present, including Vyasadeva, who was his father, and Narad Muni, who were all great devotees of the Lord. They all came to witness this incident. Apart from that, there were also many great saintly persons, saints, demigods, kings, special royal orders, all from great dynasties. They all assembled there to meet Parikshit Maharaj. And when they came there, he received them properly and bowed his head to the ground. So it is not just receiving them, but he bowed his head to the ground. So this system of bowing to the ground is a sort of a showing respect to all the senior persons present there. And that is a very good etiquette which obliges the guests also, or rather the guests also feel obliged. So even a first grade offender, it is said that if someone who commits an offense, but he is simply excused by a process like this, and Parikshit Maharaj set an example that even though such great rishis are there, and even though he was a king, he welcomed all of them by giving and exhibiting himself in a very humble form by bowing down in front of them. In the following sloka, it is mentioned as to how all the rishis, they seated themselves very comfortably with the king, humbly begging with folded hands, and he told them of his decision to fast until death. So the king decided to fast until death, and he was begging with folded hands after offering obeisances that he is intending to fast till death. Now, important point here that is mentioned is that any important decisions that are taken by personalities are always authorized by saintly persons or authorized by the scriptures. And here, Parikshit Maharaj wanted, because as a king, he was always ruling the kingdom based on the advice of the saintly persons. And here he also, because he took this decision, he wanted this decision to be approved by all the saintly persons present there. So again, he set a perfect example. And then the following sloka is mentioned. The king says, indeed, we are the most grateful of all the kings who are trained to get favors from great souls. Generally, you consider royalty as refuse, to be rejected and left in a distant place. That means the king was feeling very grateful because the kings were trained to get favors from great saintly persons. And Srila Prabhupada mentions, giving an example, how this material world is like a stool pit. This is a quote from the Chaitanya Charitamrita. This whole material world is like considered like a stool pit because we leave our stool, urine, and all these things at a long distance. In the earlier years, actually, the toilets were not within the home. They were outside of a home of a long distance because that's how the culture was. So the material world is also like a stool pit, and this royalty, Parikshit Maharaj considers to be like a stool or urine, because that has to be left at a long distance. So those who are going back to Godhead, any sort of an attachment to this material creation is a big impediment. And he thought that, he realized that this material world is nothing but a small reflection of the reality that is there in the spiritual world, which Parikshit Maharaj realized, which is true. Whatever we see in this material world, they may be very, very attractive to look at. We might think that I desire this, I desire that, but then they are all very insignificant, and they are a perverted reflection of what actually exists in the spiritual world. Parikshit Maharaj was a perfect person who realized this, and he thought that it is good that the great saints have come as a recognition for me to bring this detachment. There is another example in Chaitanya Charitamrita where Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, King Pataparudra, was a great devotee of the Lord. But as soon as the associates of Mahaprabhu went and approached Chaitanya Mahaprabhu that King Pataparudra wants to meet him, Mahaprabhu was immediately reluctant, because he thought that meeting a very worldly person is better to do, it is worse than actually suicide for one who goes back to Godhead. So that means an association with a saintly person, with a worldly person, is to be very, very, one has to be very, very careful. So Mahaprabhu did not want to associate with the king. But then what happened was, when the Rath Yatra was to take place, the king actually took up a big broom, because normally in the during Rath Yatras, the devotees clean the road for the Rath, so that the Rath can pass through that very clean path. So when the king and Pataparudra took up to this process, Mahaprabhu was pleased and he agreed to meet the king. So this is how actually devotees actually have to be very, very careful when associating with worldly minded personalities. It is not that one should disregard or avoid totally, but then one should be careful in meeting such worldly persons. Another important point that is mentioned in that sloka is that Parikshit Maharaj was actually feeling very, very grateful to the sages being present there due to his being born in the family of the Pandavas. Now, Parikshit Maharaj was a great devotee. He came in the dynasty of the Pandavas, who were all great devotees of the Lord. And Parikshit Maharaj thought that all these great sages have assembled there due to his taking birth in the family of the Pandavas. Now, it is mentioned that this was not due to his pride. Sometimes you see there are many things. Somebody has got some opulence, like a richness. Somebody is very well educated. Somebody has come from a very highly cultured family. Immediately they develop pride. But here, Srila Prabhupada clearly mentions it was not a pride like a normal materialistic person thinks due to his material possession, which is a vanity. But this is a genuine thing that Parikshit Maharaj felt. He was grateful to the Pandavas rather than exhibiting his greatness. In the following sloka, it is mentioned as to how the personality of Supreme Personality of Godhead has graciously overtaken. Parikshit Maharaj feels that actually the Lord has overtaken him in the form of a Brahmana's curse. And he feels that due to my being too much attached to family life, the Lord, in order to save me, has appeared before me in such a way that only out of fear, I will detach myself from the world. So this is a very important point, that Parikshit Maharaj realized that Brahmana's curse was a boon or a blessing for him. Why? Because at a time when, now we don't know when we have to leave our body, but Parikshit Maharaj realized that he should not have attachment to his family or attachment to his kingdom. And the Lord has appeared in the form of this curse of this Brahmana, so that Parikshit Maharaj can detach himself from all worldly affairs. So this is one important point. Another important point is that the king also thanked all these sages, because he realized that the presence of all these sages means that the Lord was also present there. Wherever devotees are present, they are considered as holy places of pilgrimage, where the Lord is also present. So when the king saw all these great saints, he also thanked them for being there. Now, another important point is that Lord takes care of his devotees. But in the case of a great devotee like Parikshit Maharaj, the Lord personally intervenes and creates detachment. So many times we might come across situations in our life where we may feel why I'm going through so much of difficulty, why I'm going through this difficult situation, why am I going through these problems in life. But for a devotee who goes through these situations, he understands it in the right perspective and takes it as a blessing or boon from the Lord, because we all have anarthas. We have lust, greed, anger. That is the very fact that we are all here in this material world, because we have these anarthas. So for us to go back to our home, back to Godhead, we have to become free from these anarthas. And the Lord, one who takes up the process of devotion service, he will also come across all these difficulties. Now, a normal materialistic person will also go through difficult situations. But when a devotee undergoes these situations, he understands, yes, the Lord has put me into this difficult situation for me to become free of these anarthas. And this only a practicing devotee can realize this. Parikshit Maharaj was not an exemption. So he thought that this situation has been arranged by the Lord to create detachment. In the following verse, it is mentioned how the king welcomed the sages in the gathering. The king said, "O Brahmanas, just accept me as a completely surrendered soul, and let Mother Ganges, the representative of the Lord, also accept me in that way, for I have already taken the lotus feet of the Lord into my heart. Let that snake bird or whatever magical thing the Brahmana created bite me at once. I only desire that you all continue singing the deeds of Lord Vishnu." So we see here, the king actually took shelter of all the sages who were present there. And he also took shelter of the Ganges water, because they are all representatives of the Lord. And this made him free from that fear of death. And he wanted the snake bird to come and bite him while they are singing the glories of the Lord. Now, the presence of saintly persons means saintly person don't discuss Gramya Katha. There are two types of Katha. Gramya Katha, that means those who discuss political affairs and all economic development and all those things. The other one is Krishna Katha, those who discuss the glories of the Lord. Wherever saintly persons are there, they don't discuss economic development and political affairs, but they discuss the glories of the Lord. So Parikshit Maharaj realized that being representative of the Lord, that this will enable him to hear the glories of the Lord, by which he can become free from the fear of death. Actually, death is a very everyone has to go through. And it is mentioned somewhere that the pain that one comes across during death is equal to some bite of 40,000 or 400 scorpions. I don't remember the exact number, but even one scorpion bites us, it is very painful. And imagine so many scorpions biting. That is the pain that one goes through at the time of death, but he is unable to express that. That is how it is. And Parikshit Maharaj, when he saw all these great personalities and was in the bank of the Ganges, he became free from the fear of death. And he wanted, let that snake bird come and bite me when I'm hearing the singing of the glories of the Lord. And then it is mentioned the following sloka, how Parikshit Maharaj offered obeisances again to the Brahmanas. And he said, I pray, if I should again take my birth in the material world, I will have complete attachment to the unlimited Lord Krishna and association with his devotees and friendly relationship with all the living beings. It's a very important sloka again. That's why I'm going a little slow, because all these slokas are very important, having a lot of meaning. And Parikshit Maharaj, in his concluding prayers, he says that even if I have to take birth, he knew that he would go back to Godhead, but he says, even if I have to take birth in the material world, I should not have any attachment to material world, but I should have complete attachment to unlimited Lord Krishna and attachment to the association with his devotees, and should have friendly relationship with all the living beings. This is how a devotee of the Lord thinks always, and that he should have association of devotees, which is very important or one's progress in spiritual life. And he also thinks that there is no enemy in this world for him. Everyone is a friend of him. This is the right way that a devotee always thinks. So as a good son of father behaves in a friendly way with all the other brothers, so also devotee also, being a good son of a Supreme Father Lord Krishna, sees all other living beings in relation to the Supreme Being. So a devotee always thinks that all other living beings are also children like me. We are all children of God. A devotee also thinks all others are also children of God. So he tries to bring back the other sons of the Father to a saner state. That means a devotee always thinks that not only should I practice devotional service, but I should find a way in which others also get delivered. So he takes up the process of preaching so that they also become free from the cycle of birth and death in this material world. A devotee always thinks that whatever it may be, I don't want even the position of Brahma, which is the topmost position, but he always aspires the association of insignificant living entities also, provided they are devotees of the Lord. So devotee does not want association with materialistic person. A devotee always aspires for saintly association with devotees of the Lord. So this is what Parikshit Maharaj realized, and he was thankful to them. And then following sloka, it is mentioned that in perfect self-control, Parikshit Maharaj sat down on a seat of straw with straw roots facing the east, placed on the southern bank of the Ganges, and he himself faced the north. Just previously, he had given the charge of his kingdom over to his son. So before undertaking this process of fasting, Parikshit Maharaj handed over his kingdom to his son. So this is how the principles work, which we might not see today. Today, a politician might want to stick to his post until he gives up his life. And after that, the sons might take over. But Parikshit Maharaj, he realized that he was going to die. So he handed over his kingdom to his son. Apart from that, there are many other positive, auspicious signs that are observed there. River Ganges is actually celebrated as the wife of the sea. That is one. Second is he sat on a mat of kusha grass, which is also considered to be very sanctified when it is taken out from that root. Now this, as you all might, it's mentioned Srimad Bhagavatam, kusha is nothing but when Lord appeared as Varahadev, some of the hairs fell, and that is what is considered as kusha grass, which is always used in places of worship. We see people sitting in the kusha. So Parikshit Maharaj is a great devotee of the Lord, and the kusha grass is very, very auspicious. Ganges river is auspicious, and he was sitting pointed to the east, which is also auspicious, but facing the north is considered to be more favorable for attaining spiritual success. The following verse is mentioned. So Parikshit Maharaj sat to fast until death. All the demigods of the higher planets, they all praised the king's actions, and in pleasure continuously scattered flowers over the earth and beat celestial drums. So when the news of Parikshit Maharaj leaving the body came to the heavenly planets, they all great personalities came. Many demigods, they showered flowers because it was a very great occasion, and they were all playing celestial drums. So the point is that even demigods are much more higher place than human beings like us. But all of them were obedient to the orders of the Lord. That means they wanted to do this as a token of honor for a great personality like Parikshit Maharaj by showering flowers over the earth and beating these drums. The demigods are also great devotees of the Lord, and they are happy when a devotee goes back to Godhead. So it is not only that a devotee goes back to Godhead, but even great personalities like the demigods, they are happy when a devotee goes back to Godhead. So this is a complete cooperation with the Lord, the devotees, and the demigods. There's a similar example which we would have studied in the first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. When Bhishma Deva was leaving his body, he was a great devotee of the Lord, and he had a boon also to leave his body at his own will. So he utilized his boon that he wanted to see the Lord at the time of leaving his body. So the Lord also favored him by coming along with the Pandavas at the time of his leaving his body. And there's a quote that when he left his body, both men as well as demigods from the heavenly planets, they all sounded drums in honor, and they all showered flowers. So there was from the sky came a shower of flowers on Bhishma Deva. This was because Bhishma Deva was a great devotee of the Lord, and apart from being a devotee, he was a great warrior. So he was looked at, he's in his title as one of the Mahajanas, like Lord Brahma, Shiva, Narada. They are all great authorities when it comes to subject of the Lord is concerned. Bhishma Deva was also is considered as one of the Mahajanas, and he was known all over the universe. So as a mark of respect, they all had for him, they also showered flowers. And then it is mentioned the following sloka that the great sages who assembled, they all praised the decision of Parikshit Maharaj, and they expressed their approval by saying very good. So naturally the sages were inclined to do all good to men. So saintly persons, they are not worldly persons, but they are all saints who are renounced, having understood the reality of this world. So they are generally, they have an inclination to good do to the common man, and they have a lot of powers, and because they are empowered by the Lord himself. So therefore, they were very much pleased to see Maharaj Parikshit as a great devotee, and they spoke to Parikshit Maharaj. They say, very good, because when Parikshit Maharaj also offered obeisances and begged their permission, the sages responded by saying very good, and they offered their blessings in their power. Now, like I mentioned, these great saints have a lot of power. So with their power, they gave their blessings also. The mood in which Parikshit Maharaj also inquired from them and took their blessings, the sages were pleased and they offered their blessings to Parikshit Maharaj. So everything was auspicious in that place, like the great sages, Ganges River, Ushagrass, a great devotee like Parikshit Maharaj, demigod showering flowers, the saints praising. So this is the power of devotional service to a Supreme Lord. So this curse that happened by a Brahmana, it became actually a blessing to Parikshit Maharaj. What I will do is, I will conclude the class with one more verse and leave for the subsequent speaker to take it forward, because time was just enough to take half of this Srimad Bhagavatam. In the last verse, it is mentioned, the sages told the Parikshit Maharaj, O chief of all saintly kings of the Pandu dynasty, who was strictly in the line of Lord Krishna, it is not at all astonishing that you give up your throne, which is decorated with the helmets of many kings, to achieve eternal association with the personality of Godhead. A very important point again. I'll repeat this again. The sages replied that, O king of the Pandu dynasty, who are strictly in the line of Lord Krishna, that means Parikshit Maharaj was also in the succession, the line of the Pandavas, coming from Lord Krishna. It is not at all astonishing that you give up your throne, which is decorated with the helmets of many kings. That means Parikshit Maharaj's throne was decorated with the helmets of many kings. Means it is not that he had decorated his throne with the helmets or the crowns of all the kings, but actually it means that Parikshit Maharaj has defeated so many kings in the world that he had this credit in his account. So that means Parikshit Maharaj became a ruler of the whole empire of the whole world by defeating so many kings. So this was the process by which they all became kings. They were not elected kings, but they became powerful by defeating the opposing kings, and they took up the throne. And it is said how astonishing it is that Parikshit Maharaj gave up that throne just to achieve the eternal association with the personality of Godhead. So Parikshit Maharaj took it as a boon so that he can go back to Godhead. And for that, Parikshit Maharaj just threw up his entire opulence, just like a stool, which I had mentioned. So Parikshit Maharaj's opulence was insignificant for him because he was going back to Godhead. Before I conclude, there is a very nice quote in the 7th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, which I would like to quote, where Prahlad Maharaj prays, "Oh my Lord, I am very much afraid of the materialistic way of life. I am not the least afraid of your present ghastly, ferocious picture of Narasimhadev." Prahlad Maharaj says, "I am not afraid of seeing you in your ghastly form as Narasimhadev, but I am afraid of this materialistic way of life." Why? Because he says this materialistic way of life is something like a grinding stone, and we are being crushed by it. So this whole material world is like a grinding stone in which we are all being crushed. And we have fallen into this horrible whirlpool of the tossing waves of life. And thus, my Lord, I pray at your lotus feet to call me back to your eternal abode as one of your servitors. So Parikshit Maharaj, Prahlad Maharaj says that we have all fallen into this whirlpool, which is full of tosses. When you get into a sea, it's got so many waves tossing. Similarly, this whole material world is like that. And so Prahlad Maharaj is praying that please call me back to your eternal abode as one of your servants. This is what is called the liberation of materialistic way of life. And then he says, I have very bitter experience of this materialistic way of life. In whichever species of life I have taken birth, compelled by the force of my own activities, I have very painfully experienced two things, namely separation from my beloved and meeting what is not wanted. So Prahlad Maharaj feels that he has had two experiences. He has experienced separation from my beloved. That means he's feeling separation from the devotees and meeting with what is not wanted. He has met many materialistic persons, and he says to counteract them, the remedies which I undertook were more dangerous than the disease itself. So I drift from one point to another, birth after birth, and I pray to you therefore to give me a shelter at your lotus feet. So Prahlad Maharaj prays that at least I want shelter at your lotus feet so that I may get free from the cycle of this birth and death. So Parikshit, it is said that Maharaj Yudhishthira gave up his throne to his grandson Parikshit Maharaj, and similarly Parikshit Maharaj handed over his throne to his son Janmejaya because he was going back to Gadget and he didn't have any attachment. So it is said that what we see today may be in total contrast, but this is the right way. A politician might think that holding a position is the highest gain of life. But the real truth is going back to our home, that is back to Godhead, is the most important aspect of life. So with this, I conclude my session for the day because it had 40 slokas. I was told I tried to take 20 so that the other 20 can also be elaborately explained. So I can take some questions, some comments on this subject until whatever I've covered.